NFC chips could actually make that a much cleaner implementation, reduce the cost, and then provide design flexibility to product designers. The two that we're focusing on is wireless charging for low power devices, which is just more of this embedded marketplace. And then the other one is finding ways to replace batteries in IoT devices, particularly on standby devices. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of 2032 watch batteries out there in the marketplace that really just are sitting there waiting for something to happen. It would make a lot more sense from a sustainability point of view and maybe even a cost point of view to say, hey, why don't you just hold your phone next to this thing for a couple of seconds and I'll power up. And then when I remove the phone, the power goes away. So that's all around wireless power.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, the CEO of IoT One. And our guest today is Mike McCammon, Executive Director of the NFC Forum. The NFC Forum is a nonprofit, member-led industry standards association that develops NFC specifications and test cases, certifies vendors, and evangelizes contactless technology. In this talk, we discuss the NFC Forum's technology development roadmap, which includes 5 elements and is centered around enabling contactless mobile use cases for both mobile phones and devices. The roadmap includes power harvesting, range extension, device-to-device connectivity, multi-tap use cases, and digital product passports to support end-of-life recycling. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, you can email us at team@iot1.com. Finally, if you have a research strategy or innovation initiative that you'd like to discuss, please email me directly at erik.walenza@iot1.com. Thank you. Mike, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Hey, thanks a lot, Eric. Glad to be here.
So this is a technology that we're going to be discussing today that I think a lot of people, most people on our call should be familiar with, but what they're probably not familiar with is kind of the long tail of different applications and maybe some of the new technology updates. So really looking forward to getting into that with you today, Mike. Quickly, before we jump into the topic of NFC, can you share how did you end up in this role as the executive director of the NFC Forum? I think you have kind of a longer background in this technology domain. What was it that led you into this position?
I guess generally speaking, over my career, I've been quite fortunate to make the most of my lucky breaks, I guess, if you will. But if you go back 20 years ago, I was working at Intel. I did wireless standards work in the mobile microprocessor group and started working on products like, standards like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. And then in 2002, I guess it was, so, feels like a lifetime ago, I left Intel to become the first executive director of the Bluetooth special interest group at a time when virtually no one had heard of Bluetooth. It was actually quite new at that time. And so I've spent the last 20 or so years, I did take a break for about 6 years in the nonprofit sector, but most of the time I've spent working on standards and really on, I have a technical background, but I would not call myself an engineer because I know some really great engineers and I'm not that. My focus has always been how do we bring these technologies into the mainstream? And so if I look back on my time at Bluetooth, that technology was built into some products, but not many. And, kind of a lot of the groundwork I laid there was to make that a mainstream technology. NFC, where I'm at now, is probably one of the more popular and most used wireless technologies of the day when you think of contactless payment, for instance. But as you've just kind of kicked us off earlier, there's a long tail of other use cases for kind of a tap interface and a short-range wireless feature set. And so I've been really glad to come to the NFC Forum to kind of help them look at how they can capitalize on those opportunities and grow the market and make our lives more simple using wireless technology.
Great. And you were mentioning, as we were chatting before we kicked off here, that the NFC Forum just last year launched a new roadmap covering,
yes,
I guess, technology development and then probably other topics related to adoption of the standard. So I think that'd be a good place for our conversation. Can you give us a high-level walkthrough of what that roadmap looks like today?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So, it goes without saying, well, as I've already mentioned, I guess, that NFC Forum standards have helped make contactless payment something that we all experience on our mobile devices, like our mobile phone and wallet, and I should say our digital wallet on our phone and also our watch bands and those types of things. But when we looked at the technology, there there seemed to be some unique opportunities for us to enhance the technology in ways that would expand the utility of the technology. And so, along with the board and many of our key members, we sat down and defined, okay, where do we want to take this over the next 3 to 5 years? And we launched the technology roadmap last year. All this information is available on the website, but I'll kind of quickly go through the top features that are on that list, and we can decide which one of these that you find you might want to jump into. But the very first one, so NFC technology that we define, we have, for instance, a way to do power harvesting. So the idea is that you can get power from another device to power up the radio. And this is basically the way your contactless card works. So when you decide to pay at retail with a credit card that's got NFC built into it, there's no battery in that card. You're harvesting power from the terminal, just to get the terminology correctly. And so this concept of being able to harvest power is something actually a lot of IoT vendors are looking at, which we can talk about more deeply in a minute. The first roadmap item, we currently support negotiated power up to 1 watt, which is again really for the smallest of accessories. So think of the stylus, think of your headphones, think of potentially like fitness trackers, very, very low power. When you think of Qi, which is the technology we use for charging our mobile phones, that's 5 watts and higher, and actually very big. And there's all kinds of differences between these two technologies. But our first roadmap item is to take that 1 watt power and extend it up to 3. We think this will allow us to capture more of those kind of fitness tracking, kind of not quite watches, but kind of in that kind of middle space between a stylus and a headphone and your mobile phone in terms of the power profile, size requirements, charging time, all those metrics. So wireless power to 3 watts is the first one. The next item on the roadmap is around range extension. So NFC forum compliant products have a range of only 5 millimeters, which is basically, it's a very, very small distance. Most of us had the experience at retail where like when we tap, we don't have to be that close. That's because the payment terminals are defining a different standard and they're much, much longer. But 5 millimeters is like literally like not even a half of an inch for your US listeners. And so we're looking at extending that range, and we think that we might be able to get 4 to 5 times that range, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite important because we think that this will make the technology appear to work much faster. It'll make it so antenna placement does not need to be as precise, and also will give product designers more freedom in terms of where they put the antenna because they'll have longer range is the logic. That's the second item on the roadmap. The third one is around the device-to-device connectivity. This one's a little bit more nebulous. Well, there's actually, I should maybe do this little quick intro. So when it comes to NFC forum technologies, we have 3 modes that we define. And the first one is card emulation mode. And that basically means that when you present your mobile phone to a payment terminal at retail, the payment terminal thinks your phone's a card. And that's card emulation mode is one of the modes that we support. The second one is around wireless charging, which I've mentioned already. And the third is reader-writer mode. And this allows you to use your phone as a reader of tags, for instance, or a writer of tags. There is a very fast-moving new use case for NFC and payment around using your mobile phone as a payment terminal. So think of, in the old days when we would have our square things that we'd plug into the headphone jack. Well, all that's gone away because you could just use your mobile phone as the payment terminal. And we think this is going to be a very disruptive trend. There are some things we can do to make that reader-writer mode a little bit better because there's some rough edges around it. And that's what the next roadmap item is. We're going to work on device-to-device connectivity. The fourth one, and I'm going to speed up, is multi-tap. The idea here is we are in the process of defining requirements as to how NFC technology, particularly on your phone, might work so that when you go to tap at retail, more than one thing can happen. So today, only thing that happens is payment. But you might want to send your loyalty card. You might want to verify your age. There's a lot of things like you're going to buy like alcohol or something. So there's a lot of other things your phone will know about that maybe we could enable, if you will, using NFC and simplify these things for the user. And then the last one is around expanding our data formats to include initiatives around sustainability. For your European listeners, they're probably very well aware of an initiative called Digital Product Passport. and the European Commission's effort around connecting all products to their sustainability data, like what materials are made of them, can they be recycled, all that kind of stuff. This is a regulation that will be landing on our doorsteps probably in the next 3 to 5 years. And the NFC Forum is working proactively to be ready for that transition so that IoT devices and handsets and all the products that have NFC already can be compliant to that standard. In fact, even add some additional features that we think will be interesting to the marketplace. So that's in a very broad sense. Those are the 5 big initiatives on the roadmap. All of these items are some of them are in research stage, some of them market requirements, some of them are, specifications are being defined. But I know that we'll be doing a big update in the springtime, a kind of a check-in on where we are in all these items. And we are making really, really good progress on most of these that we think will be interesting for product designers and consumers alike.
Okay, great. That gives us a great structure to discuss around. Maybe we walk through these one by one. So if we start with power harvesting, if I'm thinking about power harvesting, I guess I'm thinking about it in 2 different ways. One is the credit card use case where it's a device without a battery and you're basically enabling that to exchange information by acquiring power and using that immediately. And the other would be actually charging a battery.
Yes.
So it sounds like you're moving into a capability where more devices will be able to use NFC to charge their batteries as you move up in terms of wattage. Is that the primary benefit, or are there other use cases that opens up?
Yeah, I would say that that is a fair statement. I think there's 2. Well, let me just add maybe a third. So you've got obviously this credit card, low power, that's some of that is actually somewhat outside of our specifications that relates to a credit card and the payment terminal. But what might be interesting, I think, for some of your listeners is taking that concept and applying it to a different category of products. So, for instance, because it's 1 watt, there have already been some products made available to the market that take advantage of this technology that you may not initially think of. And the classic example of this is, like, for instance, a padlock. So all of us are familiar with padlocks. The idea is you put them on like a locker or something, and you would use a key or, combination to unlock them. Well, there's already one product in the marketplace that uses NFC power harvesting instead of a on-device battery to basically enable this use case. So the idea is the padlock itself has no battery, has no internet connection. It's just a padlock like you normally would have. However, it does have an NFC chipset and a board that can validate your credentials and the chipsets and logic to do that, along with the mechanical to unlock the lock. All of that is powered by a user's mobile phone. So the use case is I walk up to the padlock, I hold my phone close to the padlock just for a few, like say 1.5 seconds. That's enough time to harvest power from the phone, power up the lock, validate my credentials, and enter the mechanical to unlock the lock. When I was at CES, I was talking to a couple of vendors who I can't really name on the show floor that are building, door locks. This is the use case we call this is access control, the ability to get into places. They've already implemented NFC in their door locks. So the idea is you don't have to have a key or a card, and then you just walk up with your phone and, basically hold it and tap on the door lock and unlock it. They're already exploring how they could use this concept of power harvesting to do the same thing this padlock had done, which is to build more affordable, lower feature, if you will, door locks that can be unlocked and powered exclusively from your mobile phone. We think this is a really interesting development. One, because it'll lower the cost of those devices. And by the way, because they're on the internet, it'll make them more secure. And we think this will be a really nice feature for convenience because, again, if you have your mobile phone or watch that has NFC built into it, you'll be able to not just pay for things, but you'll now also be able to unlock doors. So there's kind of this interesting category inside of this power harvesting space. And then on the high side, like you just mentioned, we think wireless charging using NFC power is an interesting category. Unlike, I think, Qi, which is the standard from the Wireless Power Consortium, that's kind of more of the universal wireless power for mobile phones. We think NFC wireless charging will be more for the embedded market. So think of the headphones and your headphone case. Like that connection today is a mechanical, piece of metal that corrodes, that gets dirty, that, you have to have a physical connection. NFC chips could actually make that a much cleaner implementation, reduce the cost, and then provide design flexibility to product designers. So the two that we're focusing on is wireless charging for low power devices, which is just more of this embedded marketplace. And then the other one is finding ways to replace batteries in IoT devices, particularly on standby devices. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of 2032 watch batteries out there in the marketplace that really just are sitting there waiting for something to happen. And it would make a lot more sense from a sustainability point of view, and maybe even a cost point of view, to say, hey, why don't you just hold your phone next to this thing for a couple of seconds and I'll power up. And then when I remove the phone, the power goes away. So that's all around wireless power.
Yeah, that lock case is very interesting. And it's an interesting one because intuitively you'd think, well, a lock takes a fair amount of energy to close the lock, right? You have to physically move this. But then, of course, the human is there to do that job. It's, and then the job of unlatching it doesn't take so much, right? So that's interesting. This topic of wireless charging. So wired charging is to some extent still an unsolved problem in that every device has its own cord, even though the cords are primarily the same materials and they're doing the same job, but still every device has its own cord. Is there a utopia in the future where there's one wireless charging device, you have it anywhere in the house and you put any device on that and it charges? Or are we going to have the same situation where your phone and your earbuds and your watch and everything still has a little pad that does wireless charging, but only for that particular device?
Yeah, there's been a number of companies that have, kind of released proof of concept products that kind of solve this problem. So think of the idea that on your desk, you might have what do they call those things? Like you have on your desk, you have a thing that what do you call that? I'm going to call it a desk mat, but I don't know if that's what you call it. Imagine a device that would sit on your desk that might be 12 inches by 24 inches that you could place any electronic product on it and it would just charge. This is something that people have done. And there's a lot of technical challenges in doing something like that. What happens with all of these things over the course of time is you have to find these kind of mainstream use cases. And I do think that for the foreseeable future, when it comes to us charging our mobile phones and all that kind of stuff, that you want to do it wirelessly, Qi is definitely the standard, because once a couple big players move into the market and choose it, it becomes the standard. When it comes to wired connections, obviously, European Commission's pushed really hard on USB-C. And I think that's going to be the way we're going to charge, wired charging. And our aim is for devices that cannot, basically accommodate size of a Qi charger, which is, if you think about it at a, small scale for small devices, it's enormous. Works great on the flat black pane of your mobile phone, but anything that's smaller that might have curves, it just doesn't work. And so we're looking to be the alternative to Qi when it comes to embedded products that don't require as much power as, for instance, the mobile phone. And by the way, the Wireless Power Consortium, they're also working on higher usage for the kitchen. So the idea is that you can just have a countertop for your kitchen appliances. You set the device down and it just harvests power directly from the countertop. And they basically made some announcements about that technology at CES. And there's NFC technology built into that as well, around being able to do validation and foreign object detection, all those types of things using NFC as well. So I think Qi is going to be the thing we're going to use for most use cases. And then I think that there'll be other players around the edges of that. And our plan is to be the solution for embedded devices that don't need a lot of power, and also any device that has a standby battery. And that's really where our sweet spot is in terms of our feature set. Now, by the way, here's a great example. So, 20 some odd years ago, about 25 years ago, Bluetooth had the capability to do the thing that Wi-Fi does. In other words, connect your devices to the network. In fact, I still have in my basement in a box a device that's basically a Bluetooth access point. So you use your phone to connect to this device, which gets you on the internet. Great solution, made all kinds of sense. Wi-Fi was higher power, longer range. The industry kind of got behind that for that use case. And then we use Bluetooth for these other use cases. And I see that kind of similar kind of possibilities in the wireless charging marketplace, where there's one standard for one use case and other standards for other high volume use cases.
Great. That makes sense. And then the next topic that you covered here was range extension. And, it sounds like that's kind of a UX topic, right? So that's going to make it a lot easier for a product designer to create a nice experience where it doesn't feel like you're feeling around for the right place to tap. You just kind of move the card in proximity and magically the event occurs.
Yes, it is definitely focused on that feature set, which is to make things, to improve the user experience. Like I said, to make it faster and then to not make it so you have to be so precise with your antenna placement. I think we've been kind of spoiled at retail when we pay for things. One is that, we've all had the experience of trying to figure out where we're supposed to tap at retail. And those payment terminals are very, very high powered. Some of those payment terminals have ranges, which I probably don't even want to mention because they're way outside of the specifications, to make it easy to solve this problem. And so the idea is that if we make our range, kind of our compliant range for certified products, further improve the user experience.
Maybe I'm not entirely educated on this. So primarily tap today with mobile phones is used for financial transactions, at least in my experience, for payment. Are there use cases where, and maybe you alluded to this already, but are use cases where there's other exchange of information? For example, I'm on WhatsApp and I tap yours and now we've just exchanged contact information. Are there other use cases that you see either being adopted now or kind of piloted around exchange of other information aside from transactions?
Well, NFC does play a role in some of those kind of like exchanging business card type of use cases that you talked about with mobile phones. But I would say that, there hasn't been really a mainstream use case yet that really takes advantage of NFC beyond payment when it comes to just for that quick tap moment. When we look at the horizon right now, we see over the next 2 to 3 years, a much stronger attraction around access control and digital keys. So maybe another way to think about this is, and I think this is the way the handset providers are looking at it, is, okay, I've got this mobile phone and I've got a digital wallet that I can store a lot of credentials in, not just my credit card. I can store a key to my car, a key to my house, key to my office, concert tickets, like all those types of things. If I was going to get out my crystal ball, that's where I would spend my time trying to imagine interesting devices and market opportunities around the digital wallet. And so that's already happening. So the Car Connectivity Consortium, a group that we do a lot of liaison work with, they have rolled out their digital key initiative. And so this way you can on, BMWs and Hyundais and a bunch of other products that are coming down the road here very soon, I can use my mobile phone to get into the car. And by the way, I will tell you that, this is not necessarily a new use case because Tesla, for instance, implemented Bluetooth some time ago. And there are also cars that implement ultra wideband. There's a lot of different technologies out there that will, allow you to store credentials, exchange credentials, and unlock your door and start the car. But one of the things that's very unique, and I'll just pivot back to wireless charging just for 1 second. One of the reasons why the Car Connectivity Consortium and us work together is for the use case of when your mobile phone is pretty much the battery is dead. So imagine you're out and all of a sudden your battery is gone and you're in that power reserve mode. Well, light up the screen, but nothing else will happen. Well, you can actually use the car for power. So when you hold your mobile phone up next to the door pier or the door handle on whatever car model you might have, it'll harvest power from the car to validate your credentials and get you into the car. So then you can set it down on the charging station to then validate it that you have the key to start it. If you were using Bluetooth or ultra wideband, that doesn't work because if you don't have power on your phone, you can't use ultra wideband or Bluetooth. And so the Car Connectivity Consortium and their membership was like, we need to have a fallback in a no power or reserve power state. So NFC plays a great role in this, using wireless harvesting, power harvesting in this kind of different way, which is now the car is the charger for the phone, if that makes any sense, just for it to power up enough to read the credentials and get you into the device. So, think of things around the wallet, and the digital wallet and things you have there. You can obviously, I went into a Chiefs game, a couple of weeks ago on Monday night when they played the Eagles. And, they used NFC for me to get my credentials to get into Arrowhead Stadium. And these are all these types of use cases that are out there. So go back to the digital wallet, think of the things that are there and what devices interconnect around that. And that's where we see a lot of the data exchange type of activity working.
Yeah, that's a great peace of mind use case, right? I mean, I'm here in Shanghai, China, and maybe I use paper money I don't know, once a year, right? But
Right.
probably
Right.
not, right? And of course, I don't think I have keys. I just use but I use a thumbprint or, facial recognition or something, right? But basically the phone, the wallet is, it sits around somewhere, and every once in a while you need to fish a card out. But really the phone is the device that does pretty much everything for you, right? And
Right.
this is certainly the direction we're moving in, right? And that thought of being in the city and suddenly without power in your device, right? It's really incapacitating. This is quite interesting.
It's a good business for people that build batteries, because it's one of the things that I think almost all of us toss into our backpack is a way for us to charge our phone when we're mobile and our battery's going dead. Yeah, I think, it'd be interesting to see, we do a study every 2 years with ABI. They're a firm based out of the UK, and it's a global study. And we expect to see the results here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. But one of the questions we're asking this year is, how often do you leave your wallet behind to basically get to this particular use case, Eric, you're talking about? Do I need to take my wallet with me everywhere I go? We're not there in America, at least for us, because we are very dependent on cars. And so we tend to need to have our driver's licenses. Now, that's starting to happen too in some states, but it's not universal across the US yet. There are a lot of economies that are way ahead of us in terms of that particular experience. And I also think your modes of transportation kind of dictate also, what kind of credentials you take with us. But I know that I personally, even as an American, was like 6 months ago or whatever, I sat down I looked at my wallet and I said, do I really need to carry all this, stuff around with me? And the answer was no. And so I kind of weeded it out because I have most of those cards, most of my credit cards provisioned on my phone. So I don't really need to have a physical card. And so it does give us an opportunity to simplify our life. And that's one of the things obviously we love to do with wireless technologies, make things easy.
One question that is maybe looking at the landscape around NFC, right? NFC is a standard to some extent. It's a set of technologies.
Yep.
There's also a lot of other technologies that are being developed today that are then going to be interacting with NFC. And, so they could be connectivity technologies, they could be analytics technologies, edge computing, whatever that might be. What are the technologies in the broader landscape that you see as impactful, where you feel it's important for NFC to also be tracking the development of those because they might enable or somehow change the usage patterns of NFC?
I would say there's some broad categories. So I would say that, there's a use case for NFC that does include, for instance, the technologies around blockchain, around chain of custody, those types of use cases. So there are companies that have already done this, for high value items, to put an NFC chip in the packaging, for instance, or on the product or in the product, that allows it to be tracked through its life cycle. So from the time it's initially manufactured to the supply chain, and then while it's, waiting to be purchased, and then after you purchase it, and then how you get rid of it. So there's quite a lot of interesting applications for the technology there. But I would say, because they have to be high value items. They cannot be like low value items, because the incremental cost of NFC is not trivial. It's cheap, but it's not trivial. And then the other one that I would say that we are definitely following very closely, and it's more regulatory than it is technology, but it is, kind of how are we going to, live in a world 20 years from now with all these devices that, end up in landfills. And there's a really big effort, obviously, in a variety of countries, but Europe, I know, is pushing really hard around defining standards and ways that we can basically inventory this information. And we see NFC playing a very interesting role in that as well, in terms of enabling, the devices that you already own to either, for instance, read information from other products, or maybe also have that technology in those products so that those devices can also be read. So when a device gets kind of downcycled, that there's a way for, and every step along the way for different consumers or different companies to be able to harvest, whatever materials or whatever might be left in those products. So the digital product passport is what I'm kind of talking around. But we just did an ebook about that very recently. And we see that as another key use case of NFC, is enable that use case around sustainability.
So the way that would work is, let's say there's a recycler that collects a lot of old devices, and then they're going along a conveyor belt, and something basically, as the dead device rolls over, it says, this is a iPhone Model X, and it has this material composition, this much gold and whatever.
Yep.
And it tags it basically as it. Okay. Interesting.
So this particular initiative is kind of in its very early stages. And it's currently conceived in a very simplistic way and some of the early prototypes have been, you put a QR code sticker on a device and then you read it with a camera, like a QR code. And that data is stored in the cloud. And we think that's a great use case because obviously we want to support sustainability. But what we see NFC adding value to that, just like you've described, because it's a radio technology, people could build custom readers to basically, on that conveyor belt, identify those products before, as they're going across the conveyor belt. Whereas QR codes, they might be hard, they might rub off, they may not be there anymore, they might be on the bottom. Like there's all kinds of things that are difficult to read about QR codes that NFC tags would be the benefit of that. And then the next piece of this, which is, kind of the future of where we're looking is, the current design of the DPP is that you would store the data in the cloud. Most NFC chips have memory on them. Well, all of them do. And nearly all of them have room, unused memory on them. And so we're also specifying a way that products could include the data directly on the product. So again, in this use case of the, recycling place, you wouldn't have to have an internet connection to be doing all of that work as well. Whereas with QR codes, not only would you have to have a fairly sophisticated reading methodology because you have to be able to read QR codes, but you'd also have to go and, reference the cloud to get that data. Whereas NFC could be on device, permanently attached forever, and be able to be read by a radio. So it's a very different use case.
There's a lot of device categories where a consumer is not going to accept a QR code, right? I mean, don't put a QR code on my phone, please.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, you mentioned you're in China. In the West today, most payment is done via NFC. But as you know, in China, Japan's this way as well. There's kind of a patchwork of lots of different e-commerce players that you use QR codes to actually connect into those ecosystems. And I do think there's a possibility that our reader-writer mode, this ability to use your device as a payment terminal, might actually disrupt that marketplace in such a way that, when I'm in a retail shop, maybe that particular vendor has a standard off-the-shelf cheap Android phone or Huawei phone that's got a piece of software on it. And then we just tap our phones together. There's no QR code that I have to go read and go to the cloud and all those types of things. So what's really exciting is the technology is proven, it's secure, customers like the use cases, and it's just a matter of how do we continue to implement and progress the technology to more and more use cases to add more and more value to customers that are already using it.
This is probably a solved problem, but let's say you have you have Apple Pay, so I'm in China, so I'd say you have Apple Pay, you have WeChat, and you have Tencent or Alipay, and you tap, right? In the way with a QR code, right, is that you're going to kind of choose one of those apps and you're going to use that camera or you can use that specific QR. In this case, I guess one of the players, either the vendor or the consumer, would have to then make a manual choice of what payment tool to activate.
The way I would expect this to play out is that the vendor would have, let's say, for instance, a WeChat app on a device. And then basically they would launch the WeChat app and then they would have you just tap with the assumption that you would have WeChat on your device or Apple Pay or Alipay or whatever the case might be. But it would be the vendor that would have those applications on their device that they would then select and then you could tap directly there. It's still not going to solve that, diversity issue that we have. I don't call it an issue. It's actually an opportunity for lots of different players to play in that ecosystem. But I do think long term, it will probably do some consolidation in that marketplace because as a vendor, I probably won't install, 20 different payment, applications on my device, although I could, to be able to accommodate all the different customers that might walk in my front door.
Gotcha. So last question, we've walked through the roadmap. We haven't yet discussed the timeline for the roadmap. So when do you expect to bring these different capabilities to the market?
Well, all of them have their own timeline. So I'm just start there. I would say that if I kind of go through these in order, wireless power up to 3 watts, there are engineers working on that now. I don't expect to see anything this year on that higher power wattage, at least at this point in time. And by the way, we are a contribution-led standards organization that does have members in China and around the world. So if you work for a manufacturer of IoT devices and you want to get 3 watts, join the NFC forum and come help us define these standards because I don't write the specs. It's done by our membership. So just a kind of a plug there. Range extension, that one is pretty close to being finished. We are doing some final testing, and we expect to make some announcements in the middle of the year around where we'll be with range extension. Device-to-device connectivity, that's probably a 2-year work item because we're still defining some of that today. Multi-purpose tap is at market requirement stage, and that basically is we've defined what we want it to do. And then when it comes to the digital product passport, we are actually actively working on the specification, and the timeline for that is hopefully as early as this summer. But we'll see how things go. All contingent upon people working on it and all the caveats on any kind of forward-looking technology schedule. But what's really interesting about the NFC Forum, just kind of as a last plug, is 2 or 3 years ago we had right around 110 members. There's been, because of the COVID pandemic, the rise of use of contactless in everyday life, the ongoing inclusion of the technology in more and more use cases like in access control and automotive. Along with our roadmap work, our organization has grown from 105 members 2.5 years ago to over 500 members. There's a lot of momentum in the ecosystem around, what else can we use this technology for? And so, one, if you're a product designer, I would certainly take a look at the technology and ways you might be able to use it. Reach out to some of the silicon providers that are in our ecosystem if you have any questions for your specific use cases. If you're a consumer, the world is just going to get more simple, and contactless will lead the way. And certainly we're looking forward to that as well. So lots of really good momentum in this ecosystem. And I think wireless charging, with Qi2, that's going to even more further embed that. So, the world is looking really good for us right now. And I am really excited around all the contributions that have been made by the industry towards this effort.
Great. Well, Mikey, thank you for taking the time to walk us through the roadmap today. For folks listening, it's at nfc-forum.org. So I suppose that would be the place to look if you want more information or if you're thinking about joining and contributing to the standard. Mike, thank you.
Thank you.